Welcome to Front Office Pros. You may be in several Dynasty Leagues, and if you are, then you've come to the right place because we're going to take you through a beginner's guide on how to incorporate fifth-year options into your Dynasty Leagues. Before we get started, we are a new channel, so if you enjoyed this video, we ask you to smash that subscribe button to show your support.
Hike!
So the first question we have to ask is, what is a fifth-year option? All rookie contracts are 4-year contracts, except for players who were drafted in the first round. If they were drafted in the first round, then the team has the ability to accept or decline the fifth-year option. The fifth-year option amount is based on a tier system, depending on how well they perform. That was something that happened recently, a new change, but typically it's around the franchise tag number for the position. Joe, why do you think the fifth-year option is relevant? And why should Dynasty owners even care?
Yeah, I think the fifth-year option is relevant. One, if you use it, it gives you a extra year of control on that player for taking them in the first round. And then also, from the NFL aspect, you kind of get to see how much trust an organization has or faith in the player that they're going to continue to be good. So it kind of gives you an opportunity for you to look at the NFL team and get a read on how they feel on the player, before you potentially have to make that choice in fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't even have a fifth-year option, it's helpful to know what the organization thinks about a player, and that could help you to kind of understand, even from a dynasty perspective, how committed they are to the player. But I think even from a relevancy standpoint, because the NFL does fifth-year options, I think for us when we play Dynasty is kind of a makeshift experience where we put our GM hat on and we decide which players we think are going to be good. And so I think just in the fact that the NFL finds it valuable and interesting to have fifth-year options, I think it's also helpful to consider what it would mean for it to be in our Dynasty leagues.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like a reward for hitting on a guy in the first round. The rookie contract, like you said, normally just the 4 years. But then if you happen to like your first round pick, you got an opportunity to add on the fifth-year option, another year of control before you got to worry about that re-signing them or extending them to that long contract.
And most times what you'll see is they'll extend the fifth-year option to a player, and then what they'll do is sign him to a long-term extension and then restructure the original contract because that cap number is really high for the fifth-year option. It's as if it's a franchise tag. So what the teams do is then sign him to a long-term deal, have him even longer under contract, and then restructure that year one to make it much more cap-friendly for the team.
Yeah, definitely.
How would you go about incorporating a fifth-year option into your league, Joe?
Obviously, you could, just start by waiting until you have a rookie draft and whoever your players are taken in that first round. Obviously, you could, implement the first round or the fifth-year option to those first-round players that were taken in that draft. Or I feel like, maybe if you wanted to, the existing first-round picks that the guys have taken in prior drafts, maybe just only go back to like one draft maybe, and then allow those guys to add a fifth-year option to their contract if they want.
Yeah, I think probably the way for you to for a league to be able to incorporate it is I think you need salaries and contracts incorporated into your league, or else it doesn't really matter in a traditional dynasty format, because in a traditional dynasty format you can keep everyone. There's no pressure to have player movement. I have to decide whether or not I'm going to keep a player, whereas in the NFL the contract expires. I have to make a decision. So I'm going to choose to accept the fifth-year option, which typically is in the third year. So of the 4-year contract, the third year after the third season, and going into the fourth off season, you have to make a decision whether you're going to accept or decline the fifth-year option. And so for me, what I like about fifth-year options is it brings a whole new strategy to rookie drafts. Just like in the NFL, do I want to go ahead and trade back into the first round in order for me to have the ability to accept or decline a fifth-year option for that rookie player?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, the salaries, definitely plays a big part of that too, because obviously when you're trying to make that decision, cost is a big factor. And, do you accept a fifth-year option? Do you not? All depends on that cost and what you think is worth for the player as well.
So for those who may be watching that already incorporate a fifth-year option into their league, what process do you personally go through to determine whether to accept or decline a fifth-year option for a player?
Yeah, generally I start trying to see what the actual NFL team does. If they happen to be a first round pick, on my, not only on your team, but on the NFL team and kind of see what they do. That generally gives you a good inclination on how the organization feels about the player. But if I don't use that rule of thumb, a lot of it is, cost of the fifth year option if I do accept it versus how well the guy is done. Kind of like, couple of years ago, I decided whether or not to use the fifth year option on Bradley Chubb, and I ultimately decided not to. And that was strictly just because, he wasn't really playing that well and wasn't giving me the fantasy gains. And I didn't think that his play was worth what it would cost me to accept that fifth year option.
And it just so happens the Broncos also followed suit and didn't accept that fifth-year option either, which made it a lot easier for you to go ahead and make that decision because you were sort of on the fence.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was on the fence. I mean, one, I'm a Broncos fan, then also, he's a first round pick by the Broncos as well. So, definitely when they declined it, it definitely gave me some more confidence to go ahead and decline it as well.
I agree with you. I typically like to emulate what the NFL team does with the fifth-year option. So if they accept it, I typically, would most likely accept it. Same thing with declining. If they decline it, I'm most likely going to decline it. It is interesting, though, when you draft a player in your first round, in your rookie draft, that wasn't a first rounder in real life. So a lot of times it seems like running backs typically, end up rising up the boards. So let's say you draft a running back that was actually a second round pick, and then you have a fifth-year option opportunity, but the team doesn't have it because they weren't drafted in the first round of the actual draft. That's kind of a difficult dance to kind of figure out what to do.
Yeah, I think the one caveat here, though, is kind of what we've seen this past year. You got like teams like Josh Jacobs and the Commanders with Darren Payne. They decide to not extend the fifth year option to those guys, and then those guys absolutely ball out. So it's kind of one thing to look for. Just because the NFL team does decline it, you could get rewarded by their play in a kind of in a contract year, so to speak. And these last couple of guys at least have been playing harder and had really good seasons after the team declined them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I know last year as a Josh Jacobs owner, he was not in the first round conversation for us, so I didn't have the idea of whether or not to accept or decline a fifth-year option. But I was monitoring what the Raiders were doing very closely, into this 2022 offseason, heading into the 22 season. And when they declined his fifth-year option with Josh McDaniels coming in and even Josh Jacobs playing in the Hall of Fame game, you'll see me talking about how you need to sell Josh Jacobs immediately. Boy, was I wrong about that. But it looked like the writing was on the wall because he declined the fifth-year option. He's playing in the Hall of Fame game, which is basically a fifth preseason game starting for that. So it seemed really problematic. But as you saw, Josh Jacobs balled out, was the league-leading rusher. I ended up getting franchise tag, which I guess is close to the equivalent of a fifth-year option anyways. But just goes to show, it's not a nail in the coffin for these players.
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of just what I wanted to give light to. Just because the NFL team does decline, it doesn't necessarily mean the player is going to be bad or have a bad year.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even currently in this 2023 offseason, you've got the likes of Chase Young, who was the second pick overall in the draft with the Commanders, declining a fifth-year option. I know he recently tore his ACL and recovering from that ACL, but should be interesting to see if he follows that line of players who really performed well, because I think this year in 2023, more so than other years, there were a lot of teams that ended up declining that fifth-year option.
Yeah, it was pretty surprising. I feel like a lot of times more teams do pick it up, but definitely saw a lot more teams declining it, and then then you had like the Packers who just decided to extend a guy like Jordan Love just by a couple of years and make it a little cheaper than that fifth-year option would have been had they accepted it.
So that concludes our conversation on a beginner's guide on how to incorporate fifth-year options into your Dynasty League. Hopefully you found this conversation helpful and made you think a little bit more about maybe I should include this into my Dynasty League, we strongly recommend you look into adding this component to your leagues. If you enjoyed this video, we do ask you please like this video so you can show us your support. Also bring your comments below if you have any questions on fifth year options. Whether we discussed a few aspects today, but if you have other questions, you're more than welcome to send them our way. I'd be happy to answer. You can also follow us on YouTube by subscribing, as well as Apple and Spotify podcasts if you'd like to listen to these type of videos. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.